Okay, let's talk about this second paragraph of Fukuyama here. Um, this is his interpretation of the 20th century. Apparently, Fukuyama subscribes to the notion of a short 20th century, basically a 20th century that only lasted from 1914 to 1989, from the start of World War I to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And when he talks about how in World War I, liberalism first had to contend with the remnants of absolutism, by that term remnants of absolutism, he's talking about the aristocratic legacy of early modern Europe, and how by World War I, that aristocratic legacy had morphed into new forces, like the forces of militarism, imperialism, social Darwinism, and ultimately those forces contended with the ideas and the vision of President Woodrow Wilson, who was a progressive, he was a Democrat, he was a liberal, if you will, and he saw war as a tremendous tragedy, just human folly at its worst. And so he wanted to see humankind evolve to a place where, war was obsolete, war was avoided through a more kind of humane and wise approach to governing the world. And so, in this conflict, you had kind of the forces of Wilsonianism or liberalism on the one hand, and the forces of militarism and nationalism and social Darwinism on the other hand. And ultimately, America came to the rescue, I think it's safe to say, of Britain and France, and in so doing, vanquished not so much those ideologies completely, but at least vanquished the nations that had come to espouse those ideologies and the empires, in fact, that those nations had become. I'm specifically referring to the German Empire under the Kaisers, the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and then also it's important to talk about the self-defeat of Russia with their Bolshevik Revolution in the fall of 1917, which replaced the provisional government, which in turn had replaced the Tsar, Nicholas II, with a radical Marxist-Leninist regime that would later go on to become the Soviet Union. So that's World War I. Okay, it's liberalism versus some other forces that were anti-liberal in a sense. And although Wilson's ideas, like for example, the 14 points of light, the open diplomacy, self-determination, free trade, a League of Nations, although most of these ideas were rejected at the Paris Peace Conference in the spring of 1919 to such a degree that some historians look at World War I and the diplomatic aftermath of World War I as really kind of the prequel to the events of the 20s and 30s and ultimately World War II. That we can't say that liberalism, triumphed in World War I by any means, but at the same time, it's worth noting that when Wilson went to Paris in the spring of 1919,